Good morning, students. In today's lecture, we would be discussing about the basal nuclei. Basal nuclei are subcortical intracerebral masses of gray matter. So they are present in the region of brain below the cortex, within the cerebrum, and they are gray matter masses forming important part of the extrapyramidal system. In the figure here, all the red boxes, they are showing the various types of gray matter masses that together form the basal nuclei. So the classification or the parts of the basal nuclei, so it is classified into three main types, that is the corpus, striatum, the amygdaloid body, and the claustrum. The corpus striatum is further partially divided by the internal capsule into two nuclei, that is the caudate nucleus and the lentiform nucleus. And these two, that is the caudate and lentiform, are connected by bands of gray matter below the anterior limb of the internal capsule. These bands of gray matter, they give a striped appearance to this nuclei, and that is why it is known as corpus striatum. The lentiform nucleus is further divided into two parts. The lateral part is the putamen and the medial part is the globus pallidus. So in the figure here, you can see the parts of the caudate, the corpus striatum, that is the caudate nucleus, the lentiform nucleus, divisible into lateral part putamen and medial part globus pallidus. You can also see in yellow here the claustrum and the third part is the amygdaloid body. So the amygdaloid body can be seen here in this figure. This is basically the caudate nucleus. This is the lentiform nucleus. This is amygdaloid body. Another method of classification of the basal nuclei is on the basis of development, on the basis of the morphology. So it is classified as neostriatum and paleostriatum. So paleostriatum is the older and primitive part, and it consists of, or it represents, the globus pallidus. The neostriatum is newly developed, recent in origin. It is also known as striatum, and it represents the caudate nucleus and the putamen of the lentiform nucleus. This figure shows the various parts of the all those nuclei that together form the basal nuclei. So this here is the caudate nucleus. This is the head of the caudate nucleus. This is the body of the caudate nucleus. This is the tail of the caudate nucleus. You can also see the globus pallidus. Globus pallidus is further divided into globus pallidus internal and globus pallidus external. So this is internal, this is external, this is putamen. These are the bands of gray matter which connect the lentiform nucleus to the caudate nucleus. This is the amygdaloid body. So these are the various parts, the various nuclei that together form the basal nuclei. So the first nuclei we would be discussing in detail is the corpus striatum, and the corpus striatum in Latin it means striped body. The fibers, the band of fibers gives it the striped appearance. You can see in the figure the caudate nucleus is connected with the globus pallidus with the help of this gray matter fibers. and this gives it a striped appearance. So the first part of the corpus striatum is the caudate nucleus. It is a C-shaped or comma-shaped nucleus surrounded by the lateral ventricle, and the cavity of the C encloses the thalamus and the internal capsule. So this basically here is the caudate nucleus with its head, body and tail, and the C of the caudate nucleus, it encloses the thalamus. This red color is the thalamus, and it is enclosed within the cavity of the caudate nucleus. Also, you can see here in this figure, this is the caudate nucleus. This is the head portion of the caudate nucleus, and its cavity includes the internal capsule. So this is the cavity, this is the head, the body and the tail. This is the tail of the caudate nucleus. In this C-shaped cavity, there is the thalamus and this white matter band, which is the internal capsule. And at the anterior limb of the internal capsule, the caudate nucleus is connected with gray matter fibers with the lentiform nucleus. This is the lentiform nucleus with the putamen and the globus pallidus. So the caudate nucleus, it basically consists of a head, a body and a tail. The head of the caudate nucleus forms floor of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle, and it also forms the medial wall of the anterior limb of the internal capsule. And bands of gray matter connect this head of caudate nucleus to the putamen across the anterior limb of internal capsule near the anterior perforated substance. The body forms the floor of the central part of the lateral ventricle. It is medial to the posterior limb of the internal capsule, and it is separated from the thalamus by the stria terminalis and thalamostriate vein, and superiorly it is related with the corpus callosum. The tail forms roof of inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. It joins the amygdaloid body at the temporal pole as it ends. Medially related with the stria terminalis, laterally to the tapetum, that is fibers of the corpus callosum, coming from the trunk and the splenium. Superiorly, it is related with the sublentiform part of the internal capsule and the globus pallidus. So this image here shows the relations of the caudate nucleus with the lateral ventricle. So you can see here in the figure that the head of the caudate nucleus is forming the floor of the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. You can also see here that the body of the caudate nucleus forms the floor of the central part of the lateral ventricle. And you can also see here that the tail of the caudate nucleus is forming the roof of the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. This is forming the roof, the upper part, and these two are forming the lower part or the floor of the lateral ventricle. You can also in this figure see the relations of the caudate nucleus with the internal capsule. This is the head of the caudate nucleus, and it is forming the medial wall of the anterior limb of the internal capsule. So this would be the lateral side and this would be the medial side. So it is forming the medial wall of the internal capsule. That is the anterior limb of the internal capsule. And you can also see the gray matter bands in the blue circle connecting this head of caudate nucleus to the putamen. Then the body of the caudate nucleus, it lies medial to the posterior limb of the internal capsule, So obviously it will go around this, and it will lie medially to the posterior limb, and it is separated from the thalamus. In between this body and thalamus there would be this thalamostriate vein and the stria terminalis. And the tail, it ends, and it is basically in relation with the amygdaloid body. It joins the amygdaloid body. You can see here in this figure that this is the caudate nucleus, and this caudate nucleus is separated from the thalamus. So in between there is the stria terminalis, and at the same location there would be thalamostriate vein. This figure also shows the relations of caudate nucleus with the lateral ventricle, how the caudate nucleus, the various parts of the caudate nucleus are related with the various parts of the lateral ventricle. Second is the lentiform nucleus. It is a lens-shaped large nucleus which is and it forms the lateral boundary of the internal capsule, and it lies beneath the insula and the claustrum. So you can see here, this is the insula, this green area. Here is the insula or the insular cortex. It is a very small region of the cerebral cortex which lies deep within the lateral sulcus, this green area. It lies within the lateral sulcus. Lateral sulcus is a large fissure. It separates the frontal lobe, parietal lobe from the temporal lobe. So the lentiform nucleus, it lies beneath this insula and the claustrum, and these three are the parts of the lentiform nucleus, that is the putamen, the globus pallidus external, and the globus pallidus internal. The lateral surface of the lentiform nucleus is convex, and it is related with the external capsule, claustrum, outermost capsule, insula, and grooved by the lateral striate arteries. The medial surface is more convex in comparison to the lateral surface, and it is related with the internal capsule, the caudate nucleus, and the thalamus. And the inferior surface is in relation with the sublentiform part of the internal capsule, the tail of the caudate nucleus, and the inferior horn of the lateral ventricle. So here in this figure you can see the relations of the medial surface, which is more convex, and it is in relation with the internal capsule. This green area is the internal capsule, so the medial surface is related with the internal capsule, also with the thalamus. This is the thalamus behind the internal capsule, and also with the caudate nucleus. This is the caudate nucleus, this is the internal capsule, and this is the thalamus. And the lateral surface, which is also convex, this is the lateral surface, and it is in relation with the claustrum. This arrow here is for the claustrum, so it is related with the claustrum. The area between the claustrum and the putamen is known as the external capsule. You can see a very narrow, very thin area of white matter which is present between the putamen and the claustrum. This is the outer capsule or the external capsule, and the white matter area between the claustrum and this green portion insula is the outermost capsule. So there is an internal capsule, then there is an external capsule, and then there is an extreme capsule or the outermost capsule. So the lateral surface is related to the claustrum, it is related to the external capsule, it is related to the extreme capsule, and it is related to the insula. And it is also grooved by the lateral striate arteries. and a band of very thin band of white matter divides the lentiform nucleus into a larger lateral part, which is putamen, which contains many small cells, and a globus pallidus. Basically, it is known as pallidus because it is pale in appearance as compared to the other gray matter masses. It is in comparison to the other, it is pale, and it is smaller, and it is made up of large motor cells. So if you see here in this figure, in comparison to this putamen, it is comparatively pale and lighter. That is why it is known as globus pallidus. So that's all for today's lecture. The remaining portion would be discussed in the next lecture. Thank you so much.